Thursday, July 18th, 1946. Greenwood, South Carolina, 2:15 in the afternoon. Margaret Maggie Johnson, 73 years old, grandmother of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, one of the most powerful black gangsters in American history, walked down Main Street carrying groceries from Miller's General Store. She'd lived in Greenwood her entire life. Born there in 1873, just 8 years after the Civil War ended. She'd survived Reconstruction, survived Jim Crow, survived the Depression, survived 2 world wars. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, frail, arthritic, moving slowly with a wooden cane that had belonged to her late husband. She wasn't political, wasn't confrontational, wasn't involved in civil rights activism or anything that might draw attention. Just an elderly black woman trying to live her remaining years in peace, visiting her famous grandson in New York twice a year, spending the rest of her time in the small house on Cedar Street where she'd raised her children and grandchildren decades ago. Margaret had been widowed in 1929 when her husband died of pneumonia. Her daughter, Bumpy's mother, had died even earlier, in 1916, when Bumpy was just 11 years old. After her daughter's death, Margaret had raised Bumpy herself through his teenage years in South Carolina before he moved to Harlem in the 1920s. She'd watched him transform from a sweet, intelligent boy into one of the most feared criminals in America. Despite everything he'd become, despite the violence and the criminality and the danger, she loved him unconditionally. She never judged him, never lectured him, never tried to change him. She just loved him. And Bumpy, in turn, revered his grandmother. She was the one person in his entire life who loved him without judgment, without fear, without agenda. She was sacred to him, absolutely untouchable, the single line that nobody in the world was allowed to cross. At 2:23 p.m. on that Thursday afternoon, as Margaret walked past the Greenwood Women's Social Club carrying her bag of groceries, she accidentally bumped into Eleanor Pritchard. Eleanor was 52 years old, white, wife of Deputy Sheriff Robert Pritchard, prominent member of the local Baptist church, and well known among Greenwood's black community as one of the most virulent racists in town. The collision was minor, completely accidental. Margaret's eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and she simply didn't see Eleanor standing there. She immediately apologized, her voice respectful and deferential in the way that elderly black people in 1946 South Carolina had learned was necessary for survival. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Didn't see you there. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Please forgive me. I meant no harm." Eleanor Pritchard's response was volcanic, disproportionate, designed for spectacle. "You touched me!" she screamed, loud enough that people up and down Main Street stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. You don't touch white women! You don't even look at white women! Who do you think you are?" Margaret, terrified now, apologized again, more desperately this time. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'm just an old woman. Please, I didn't mean any disrespect." But Eleanor wasn't interested in apologies. She was interested in spectacle, in demonstration, in reminding Greenwood's black population of their place in the social hierarchy. She turned to 3 other white women who were standing nearby on the sidewalk, all members of the same women's social club, all wives of prominent white men in town. "This nutter assaulted me! She grabbed me! Put her hands on me! We need to teach her a lesson she won't forget!" The 3 women, Patricia Crawford, 48 years old, wife of the president of Greenwood National Bank, Virginia Morrison, 45 years old, wife of the school superintendent, and Catherine Walsh, 51 years old, wife of the county clerk, immediately joined Eleanor. All 4 women surrounded Margaret, an elderly woman, 73 years old, 5 feet tall, carrying groceries. Terrified, what happened next would become one of the most brutal and consequential lynchings in South Carolina history. It would also trigger a response so swift, so efficient, and so final that it would fundamentally alter how white supremacists throughout the South thought about targeting black families who had connections to powerful criminal figures in the North. To understand what happened on July 18th and why the consequences were so immediate and so devastating, you need to understand the relationship between Margaret Johnson and her grandson Bumpy. She hadn't just been his grandmother. She'd been his mother figure after his actual mother died. She'd raised him, shaped him, loved him through everything. Bumpy visited her twice a year without fail, sent her money every single month, paid for her house, her medical care, her groceries, everything she needed. Margaret was the one person Bumpy Johnson loved without reservation or complication. She was sacred, the line that absolutely nobody could cross. Eleanor Pritchard and her 3 friends didn't know this, didn't know that Maggie was Bumpy Johnson's grandmother, didn't know they were about to cross a line that would get them killed before the sun rose the next morning. At 2:27 p.m., the 4 white women dragged Margaret off Main Street, into an alley that ran between Morrison's hardware store and Greenwood National Bank, away from witnesses, away from anyone who might intervene. Margaret was crying, begging, "Please, I'm an old woman. I didn't mean any harm. Please just let me go home. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Eleanor Pritchard slapped her, hard, across the face. The sound echoed in the alley. "You don't speak unless spoken to, nut." The other 3 women joined in, hitting, kicking, pushing Margaret to the ground. She fell hard, dropped her bag of groceries, eggs and bread and milk, spilling across the dirty alley floor. Her wooden cane clattered away, out of reach. She was on the ground now, defenseless, 73 years old, being beaten by 4 women who were decades younger and significantly stronger. A black man named Thomas Washington, 32 years old, who worked at Morrison's hardware store, was taking his afternoon break in the back when he heard the commotion. He looked out and saw what was happening. An elderly black woman being beaten by 4 white women. He started to move toward them, to intervene, to help. "Hey, stop! She's an old woman. What are you doing to her?" Patricia Crawford whirled on him, her face twisted with rage. "You stay back, boy! You stay right there, unless you want to join her." Thomas stopped, frozen. He knew the rules. Every black person in the South knew the rules. A black man intervening to protect a black woman from white women meant death. Not just for him, for his family, his wife, his children, his parents, everyone he loved. So he stood there, helpless, watching, tears running down his face. Witnesses who saw him later that day said he looked destroyed, broken, like something fundamental inside him had died. The beating continued for 11 brutal minutes. At 2:38 p.m., Eleanor Pritchard made a decision that would seal her fate and the fate of her 3 friends. "We need to teach all these NRs a lesson they won't forget," she said, breathing hard from the exertion of beating an elderly woman. "We're going to lynch this old bee, right here, right now. Someone get rope." Catherine Walsh ran back to the hardware store, confronted Thomas Washington, who was still standing outside, frozen in traumatized shock. "Give me rope, now!" Thomas refused, shaking his head, unable to speak. Catherine screamed at him, then went inside and screamed at the store owner, Mr. Henderson, a white man in his 60s. "Give me 50 feet of rope right now." Henderson knew exactly what was happening, knew exactly what the rope was for, and he handed it over anyway, because in 1946, South Carolina, a white store owner who refused to provide rope for a lynching would himself become a target. By 2:45 p.m., the 4 white women had dragged Margaret to a large oak tree at the end of the alley. Ancient tree, probably 100 years old, strong branches. They were making a noose. Margaret was barely conscious now. Her face was swollen and bloodied. She had multiple broken ribs. She could barely breathe. She wasn't resisting anymore. Couldn't resist. Too injured, too exhausted, too old. Her body had simply given up. At 2:52 p.m., they hanged her. 4 white women lynched a 73-year-old black grandmother in broad daylight in an alley in downtown Greenwood, South Carolina, because she had accidentally bumped into one of them on the street. Margaret Johnson died within 3 minutes, strangled by the rope, her small body swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze, her life ended by casual, recreational cruelty. The 4 women stepped back, looked at their work, and laughed. Actually laughed. Eleanor Pritchard said something about teaching these people their place. Virginia Morrison agreed. They were satisfied, pleased with themselves. They left Margaret's body hanging there and walked back to Main Street, resumed their shopping. Went into the dress shop, discussed patterns and fabrics, acted like absolutely nothing had happened. Because in 1946, South Carolina, lynching a black person, even an elderly woman, even in broad daylight, carried absolutely no legal consequences if you were white. Local law enforcement wouldn't investigate, the state wouldn't prosecute, the federal government wouldn't intervene. It was just another Thursday afternoon in the Jim Crow South. At 3:15 p.m., Thomas Washington did something incredibly brave, something that could have gotten him killed. He left the hardware store, found a telephone at the black-owned barbershop 2 blocks away, and made a long-distance call to New York City. Thomas didn't know Bumpy Johnson personally, had never met him, had never even been to New York, but he knew that Margaret was Bumpy Johnson's grandmother because she'd mentioned it once, months ago, while shopping at the hardware store. She'd been proud of her grandson, despite everything, had mentioned that he was doing well up north, that he took care of her. Thomas knew that Bumpy Johnson was powerful, dangerous, connected, and Thomas knew that Bumpy Johnson needed to be told what had just happened to his grandmother. The call went through multiple operators and transfers before finally reaching Marcus Webb, Bumpy Johnson's top lieutenant and most trusted associate, at 3:47 p.m. 32 minutes after Thomas made the initial call, Thomas was nervous, speaking quickly, afraid the line might be cut, or that someone might discover what he was doing. He explained everything, the accidental bump on Main Street, the beating in the alley, the rope, the lynching, 4 white women. He gave their names: Eleanor Pritchard, wife of the deputy sheriff; Patricia Crawford, wife of the bank president; Virginia Morrison, wife of the school superintendent; Catherine Walsh, wife of the county clerk. All prominent, all unpunished, all currently shopping on Main Street like nothing had happened. Marcus Webb's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Stay by that phone. Someone will call you back within 1 hour with instructions. Do not leave. Do not talk to anyone else about this. Do you understand?" Thomas said yes. Marcus hung up, immediately placed another call. This one to Bumpy Johnson's personal residence in Harlem. At 4 p.m., Bumpy Johnson was having dinner in his apartment on West 147th Street. Pot roast, potatoes, green beans, a quiet Thursday afternoon. The phone rang. Bumpy answered. Marcus's voice came through the line. "We have a situation. Your grandmother was lynched in Greenwood, South Carolina, approximately 90 minutes ago. 4 white women. I have their names. I have a witness. I have all the details." Bumpy didn't speak. The silence stretched out for 15, 20, 25 seconds. Marcus waited. He knew this silence, had heard it before. When Bumpy Johnson went completely silent, when all the rage and grief and pain compressed down into absolute quiet, that's when people died. That's when the response was most severe. Finally, Bumpy spoke. His voice was ice. "Give me the names." Marcus read them slowly. Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, Catherine Walsh. Bumpy wrote each name down on a piece of paper with mechanical precision. When Marcus finished, Bumpy said, "I want them dead, all 4 of them, tonight, before sunrise tomorrow. I want them found in trash bags, disposed of like garbage, because that's what they are. Garbage. They treated my grandmother like trash, so that's how they'll be disposed of. You have 9 hours. Sunrise is 6:15 a.m. tomorrow morning. They need to be dead and bagged before then." Marcus started to respond, to explain the logistical challenges. "Bumpy, Greenwood is more than 800 miles from here. We can't possibly get a team down there and execute 4 people in 9 hours. It's not physically." Bumpy interrupted. "I don't care about logistics, Marcus. I care about results. Use anyone you need to use. Pay whatever you need to pay. Call in every favor we have south of the Mason-Dixon line. But those 4 women are dead before sunrise. That is not negotiable. That is not up for discussion. My grandmother was 73 years old. She was 5 feet tall. She weighed maybe 90 pounds. They hung her in an alley because she accidentally bumped into one of them. They laughed about it afterward, went shopping, discussed dress patterns. Like killing an old woman was entertainment. I want them to understand what it feels like to be treated like garbage. I want their bodies in trash bags. I want them dumped somewhere public where the whole town can see them. I want Greenwood, South Carolina to wake up Friday morning and find 4 white women's corpses in garbage bags on Main Street. That's the message. That's the lesson. That's what happens when you touch my family." Marcus Webb understood completely. "Consider it done. They'll be dead before sunrise." At 4:15 p.m., Marcus began making phone calls. He needed people in South Carolina, people who were capable, experienced, loyal, and most importantly, fast. Fortunately, Bumpy Johnson's criminal organization had extensive connections throughout the South. Criminal networks don't respect regional boundaries or state lines. Money and power create relationships everywhere. Marcus called Antoine Tony Beauregard, a black gangster who controlled illegal gambling, prostitution, and liquor operations in Charleston, South Carolina, approximately 180 miles from Greenwood. Tony had worked with Bumpy's organization multiple times over the years. He owed Bumpy favors, multiple significant favors. Now it was time to collect. "Tony, it's Marcus Webb, Bumpy Johnson's lieutenant. We have an urgent situation in Greenwood. 4 white women lynched Bumpy's grandmother this afternoon. Bumpy wants them dead, tonight, all 4, before sunrise. Bodies need to be found in trash bags. Can you handle this?" Tony didn't hesitate even for a second. Jesus Christ. "They lynched Bumpy's grandmother? Yeah, I can handle it. Absolutely. Give me the names and addresses right now." Marcus provided everything that Thomas Washington had told him, plus additional information that his contacts in South Carolina had gathered in the past hour. All 4 women lived in Greenwood. All were married to prominent white men. All home addresses were known and confirmed. All had predictable daily routines. "You have 9 hours total," Marcus said. "Sunrise is 6:15 a.m. They need to be dead and bagged before sunrise. That's the requirement." Tony thought for a moment. 9 hours is extremely tight. Greenwood is about 3 hours from Charleston by car, but I have people who are closer. I can reach out to contacts in Columbia. That's only 90 minutes from Greenwood. I can make this work. What's the budget for this operation? Unlimited. Bumpy doesn't care what this costs. He said to use whatever resources necessary. Just get it done. Tony immediately began making his own calls. Within 30 minutes, by 4:45 p.m., he'd assembled a 4-man team, all experienced, all with military or criminal backgrounds, all completely loyal, all understanding the gravity and urgency of the assignment. 4 white women dead by sunrise, bodies placed in trash bags, dumped publicly. No witnesses, no evidence, no traces that could lead back to anyone involved. At 7 p.m., Tony's team arrived in Greenwood, South Carolina. They'd driven from Columbia, which was about 90 miles away, in 2 vehicles. They parked on the outskirts of town, away from streetlights and traffic, waited for full darkness, used the time to study their targets, to observe the houses, to identify security weaknesses, to plan their approach. All 4 women were currently at home, eating dinner with their families, watching radio programs, reading, completely unaware, completely comfortable, safe in the absolute certainty that lynching a black woman carried no consequences whatsoever. In 1946 South Carolina, they were catastrophically wrong about that. At 9:30 p.m., the team moved on their first target, Eleanor Pritchard. Her house was a modest 2-story home on Maple Street. Her husband, Deputy Sheriff Robert Pritchard, was working the night shift at the sheriff's office. Eleanor was home alone. The team's approach was methodical and professional. 2 men approached the back door. One picked the lock in 18 seconds using tools that left no marks. They entered the kitchen quietly. Eleanor was in the living room, sitting in an armchair, listening to a radio drama, knitting. She heard a sound from the kitchen and called out, "Robert, is that you? Did you forget something?" No answer. She set down her knitting and walked toward the kitchen, mildly annoyed. She entered the kitchen and saw 2 black men standing there. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened to scream. One man stepped forward and covered her mouth with his hand before any sound could emerge. The other man injected her in the neck with a sedative that had been stolen from a veterinary clinic in Colombia. Powerful sedative designed for large animals. Eleanor's eyes rolled back. Her body went limp. She was unconscious in 12 seconds flat. They carried her out the back door, placed her in the truck, covered her with a tarp, and drove away. Total time inside the house, 90 seconds, no witnesses, no noise, no evidence left behind. They drove to an abandoned barn approximately 3 miles outside of Greenwood, property that hadn't been used in years. Perfect location, isolated, no neighbors, no traffic. At 10:15 p.m., they took Patricia Crawford. Her house was larger, more expensive, reflecting her husband's position as bank president. Her husband was home, but he was drunk, passed out on the couch in the den, snoring loudly. Patricia was upstairs in the master bedroom, reading a romance novel. The team used the same method. Back door, lock-picked, silent entry. They found Patricia upstairs. She looked up from her book, saw them, opened her mouth to scream. Never got the chance. Sedative injection, unconscious in seconds, carried out while her drunk husband snored on the couch downstairs, completely oblivious. Out of the house in 90 seconds, into the truck, to the barn. At 11 p.m., they grabbed Virginia Morrison. Her house was a craftsman-style home with a large front porch. Her husband was traveling on business, wouldn't be back until Saturday. Virginia was home, alone with her teenage daughter. But the daughter had gone to bed at 10:30, was asleep in her bedroom upstairs. The team waited until they saw the daughter's light go off, then moved. Same method, back door, lock-picked. Virginia was downstairs in the kitchen, making herself tea, saw them, tried to run. Didn't make it 5 steps. Sedative. Unconscious. Out the back door. The daughter slept through everything. Never knew her mother had been taken from the house while she was sleeping 30 feet away. At 11:45 p.m., they went after Catherine Walsh. She was the most complicated target because her husband was home, awake, and alert. Gerald Walsh was a former Marine, had served in the Pacific during World War II, had combat experience, was not someone to underestimate. The team had to be creative. They set a small, contained fire in the toolshed behind the Walsh house, just enough to create smoke and flames that would be visible, but not enough to actually threaten the house or spread, not enough to cause real damage. Mr. Walsh saw the smoke through the kitchen window, grabbed a fire extinguisher, ran outside to investigate and put it out. While he was in the backyard dealing with the fire, the team entered through the front door. Catherine was in the living room, had stood up when she saw her husband run outside. 2 men grabbed her, sedative injection, out the front door, into the truck, gone before Gerald Walsh came back around to the front of the house. He never knew his wife had been taken, would assume she'd gone to bed when he came back inside, and found the living room empty. By 12:30 a.m. on Friday morning, July 19th, all 4 women were in the abandoned barn. The sedatives were wearing off. They were starting to regain consciousness, confused, disoriented, terrified beyond anything they'd ever experienced. Their hands were bound with rope, their mouths were gagged with cloth. They couldn't scream, couldn't call for help, couldn't do anything except look at each other with wide, terrified eyes, and at the 4 black men who were standing nearby, waiting. The team leader, a man named Samuel Sam Pierce, a former Army Ranger who had served in Europe during World War II and now worked in Tony Beauregard's organization, stepped forward. He was calm, clinical, professional, not angry, not emotional, just utterly matter-of-fact. He addressed the 4 women in a voice that was almost gentle. "My name isn't important. What's important is why you're here. This afternoon, at approximately 2:52 p.m., you 4 women lynched an elderly black woman named Margaret Johnson. You beat her in an alley, you dragged her to a tree, you made a noose, you hung her, then you went shopping, laughed about it, went to the dress shop, discussed fabrics, like killing a 73-year-old woman who weighed 90 pounds was entertainment. Something fun to do on a Thursday afternoon." The women were crying now, tears running down their faces, trying desperately to speak through the gags, trying to explain, or plead, or beg. Sam continued as if they hadn't made a sound. "What you didn't know, what you couldn't have known, is that Margaret Johnson was the grandmother of Bumpy Johnson. You've probably never heard that name. He's a very powerful man in New York City. One of the most powerful black men in America, actually. And he loved his grandmother more than anything else in the world. She raised him after his mother died. She was the one person he loved without reservation. And you killed her because she accidentally bumped into one of you on the street." Eleanor Pritchard was shaking her head violently, making muffled sounds through the gag, her eyes pleading. Sam ignored her. "So Mr. Johnson sent us here with very specific instructions. He wants you dead, all 4 of you. And he wants your bodies found in trash bags, disposed of like garbage, because that's what you are to him. Garbage, trash. You treated an elderly black woman like garbage, so that's how you'll be disposed of. Your bodies will be found in trash bags on Main Street tomorrow morning, and everyone in Greenwood will understand the message. Touch Bumpy Johnson's family. This is what happens. You're going to die now. It's going to be quick. 1 shot each. You won't suffer more than absolutely necessary. That's more mercy than you gave Margaret Johnson. She strangled for 3 minutes before she died. You'll be gone in a fraction of a second." Sam pulled out a handgun, military-issue Colt 1911, suppressor attached, professional equipment. He shot Eleanor Pritchard first, headshot, point-blank range, dead instantly. Then Patricia Crawford, then Virginia Morrison, then Catherine Walsh. 4 shots, 4 deaths, all in less than 30 seconds. Time of death, 12:47 a.m., Friday, July 19th, 1946, exactly 9 hours and 55 minutes after they had lynched Margaret Johnson, well ahead of the sunrise deadline that Bumpy had specified. At 1:30 a.m., the team worked efficiently and methodically. They had come prepared. 4 heavy-duty industrial trash bags, the kind used for construction debris, thick black plastic. Each body was placed into a bag. The bags were sealed with strong tape. The 4 bagged bodies were loaded into the back of the truck. The team drove into Greenwood, down Main Street, which was completely deserted at 1:45 in the morning. They parked directly in front of the Greenwood Women's Social Club, the same building where Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, and Catherine Walsh were all members, where they had regular meetings and luncheons, where they socialized and gossiped and planned community events. The 4 men carried the trash bags out of the truck and placed them carefully on the sidewalk, side by side, impossible to miss, clearly visible from the street. Then they got back in the truck and drove away, out of Greenwood, back toward Columbia. By 3 a.m. they were 100 miles away. By dawn they'd be in Charleston. By Saturday afternoon they'd be scattered across 3 different states, untraceable, invisible. At 6:45 a.m. Friday morning, Greenwood began to wake up. People heading to work, opening shops, starting their day. Several people walked past the 4 large black trash bags on the sidewalk in front of the Women's Social Club. Most assumed it was garbage waiting for collection, though it seemed odd that anyone would leave trash there. Then someone noticed dark liquid, red liquid, leaking from the bottom of one bag. Blood. They called the police. Within 15 minutes, Sheriff William Hartwell and 3 deputies were on scene. They opened the bags. Found 4 bodies, all white women, all shot in the head, all prominent members of the community, all wives of influential men. Within an hour, all 4 were identified. Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, Catherine Walsh. The same 4 women who had lynched Margaret Johnson less than 30 hours earlier. Everyone who mattered in Greenwood knew what had happened. The sequence was obvious. 4 women lynch an elderly black woman on Thursday afternoon. Thursday evening, all 4 women disappear from their homes under mysterious circumstances. Friday morning, their bodies are found in trash bags on Main Street. This wasn't random. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was retaliation. This was revenge. This was someone with significant power and resources demonstrating that lynching has consequences. Sheriff Hartwell conducted interviews, spoke to witnesses, pieced together the timeline. He learned that Margaret Johnson was Bumpy Johnson's grandmother. He immediately understood the full picture. This wasn't a local crime. This was an operation orchestrated by one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. Someone with the resources to deploy a professional team 800 miles into the Deep South, execute 4 white women in their own homes in a matter of hours, and disappear without leaving a single trace of evidence. That kind of capability was terrifying. That kind of capability meant that no one in Greenwood was safe if they crossed the wrong person. Hartwell called the FBI. Special Agent Robert Morrison came down from the Columbia office to review the case. Morrison spent 2 days investigating, interviewed witnesses, examined the crime scenes, reviewed the evidence, or rather, reviewed the complete absence of evidence. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, Morrison called Hartwell into his temporary office at the sheriff's station. "Sheriff, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This investigation is going nowhere. You're not going to find the killers. They're long gone. Probably back in New York or Charleston, or scattered across 5 different states by now. You have no witnesses who saw anything useful. You have no physical evidence. You have no leads. What you have is a professional hit conducted by people who knew exactly what they were doing and who had the resources to do it perfectly." Morrison continued. "More importantly, and I want you to really hear this, pursuing this case aggressively could get you killed, could get your deputies killed, could get your family killed. Bumpy Johnson just demonstrated that he can reach into a small town in South Carolina and execute 4 white women in their homes in the span of a few hours. You really want to provoke him further. You really want to paint a target on your back, because that's what you'll be doing if you keep investigating. My recommendation, off the record, is that you close this case. Call it unsolved. Let the families bury their dead. Let everyone move on, because the alternative is that you keep digging, and eventually you dig deep enough that Bumpy Johnson decides you're a problem, and then you end up in a trash bag too." Sheriff Hartwell understood. He was angry, but he wasn't stupid. He closed the case, officially unsolved. The 4 families buried their dead in Greenwood's White Cemetery. They held funerals, they grieved, but they never got justice, never got closure, never learned who had killed their wives and mothers, because justice had already been served. Swift, precise, final. Margaret Johnson was buried in Greenwood on Sunday, July 21st, 1946. Bumpy Johnson flew down from New York. He attended the funeral, stood silently at her graveside as the preacher said prayers, and the small black congregation sang hymns. Bumpy didn't speak, didn't cry publicly, didn't show any emotion at all. He just stood there, dressed in an expensive black suit, staring at the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. Marcus Webb stood beside him. After the burial was finished and everyone else had left, Marcus asked quietly, "Are you satisfied?" Bumpy's response was simple and cold. "My grandmother is dead, Marcus. I'll never be satisfied. But those 4 women learned what happens when you treat an old black woman like garbage. They became garbage themselves, found in trash bags where they belonged. That's not satisfaction. That's just basic mathematics. An equation balanced. They took something precious from me, so I took everything from them. That's not revenge. That's just making sure the books are even. The 4 white women, Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, and Catherine Walsh, were buried in Greenwood's White Cemetery the same week. Their families held separate funerals. The entire white community was in shock. Frightened. Confused. How could 4 white women be murdered in a small southern town and the killers just disappear? How could there be no arrests, no suspects, no justice? The answer, which everyone understood but nobody said out loud, was that they had crossed a line that should never be crossed. They had killed someone connected to real power. And real power, unlike the law, doesn't care about jurisdiction or procedure or legal niceties. Real power just acts. July 18, 1946, 2:52 p.m. 4 white women lynched 73-year-old Margaret Johnson in an alley in Greenwood, South Carolina. July 19, 1946, 12:47 a.m. All 4 women are dead, shot in the head, in an abandoned barn, 9 hours and 55 minutes from crime to consequence. July 19, 1946, 6:45 a.m. All 4 bodies found in trash bags on Main Street, exactly where Margaret Johnson was lynched. That's not revenge. That's Bumpy Johnson, demonstrating that family is sacred. That some lines cannot be crossed. That treating an elderly black woman like garbage means becoming garbage yourself. Literally, in bags, disposed of publicly. Within 9 hours, proven, documented, absolute. Nobody ever touched Bumpy Johnson's family again.